Rauscher here. Welcome to our Stony Hill video series on adult spiritual development, the creation of an authentic spirituality for the 21st century. In each video session of this series, we'll explore 4 or 5 of the key or big concepts in each chapter of the book. Now, our goal together will be to learn the skills to create happiness, success, and have healthy relationships with those around us. We'll also include the life skills required to create a viable future for our children and our grandchildren. We're going to journey together from our childhood primitive ego to that of a more awakened and enlightened adult consciousness, a consciousness capable of offering unconditional kindness and compassion to those around us. Now, the ideas that we'll cover together in this video series will not be complicated. They'll be based on basic common sense, and they've been designed to be incorporated into your day-to-day life. So they have to be easily digested and they have to make sense to you. So let's get started. Today we're going to take a look at 5 of the big ideas covered in Chapter 1 of the book entitled Growth and Change. The first big idea in this chapter is the idea that the primitive ego is not bad. And this is something that will be really important to remember as we go through the series. The primitive ego is simply immature. It's the childhood ego that we develop in early childhood, and it's quite immature. If we take that immature ego and take it into the adult world and then try to solve problems and negotiate a much more complicated world than the children, than we did as a child, then what we're going to do is we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot, because we're not going to have the ego sophistication that we need to navigate the adult life. In other words, we're going to awaken this primitive ego. We're going to evolve it. And what'll change is what we see in the world and how we see it, how we think about it. That's the whole concept of awakening. Okay, the second big idea in the book is growth. And growth is when we change our old way of seeing. Now, a lot of people have the belief, which is a false belief, that if we want to change, we do it kind of with a force of will. We just say, okay, we're going to change. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. We change the way we see the world and the way we think when the old ways just don't make sense anymore. And when we recognize that they're just not making sense, they're not logical, then we automatically, it's like a snake shedding its skin. There's no effort involved, it just happens. So when we change the old way of seeing, because it doesn't make sense anymore, then we begin to see the world with new eyes. Okay? In other words, we're beginning to awaken. Okay, next big idea. Everybody thinks that when we change the way we think, that we have to become a whole new person. That's not true. What we're going to do is we're going to graft on some new ways of seeing the world, and if they make sense, they become our new maps. If they don't make sense, throw them out. Okay? So anything in this series, in this video series, that doesn't make sense to you, you have permission to ignore it or to throw it out. But if it does make sense, and you'll know inside, if it does make sense, then all I suggest is sit and think about it. Play with it a little bit. See what the world might look like if you were using that new concept, that new map of reality. So the idea that I like in this particular idea here is that we graft on these new ideas to our old ways of being, and we end up basically creating new maps of reality. Okay? Next big idea, Confucius. This is one of my favorites. Confucius had a group of people that were called the people of the Ren, and Ren basically means love. So they were the people of love. What Confucius said is you had to you had to master Chung, which is self-awareness, before you could go into the world and offer compassion. So what he meant by this is, if you meet somebody that you think is kind of unloving, then what you do is you look at your own ability to love. If you find a person who's not being compassionate, instead of blaming them, Confucius said, look at your own ability to be compassionate. Once a person had accomplished this art of Chung, which is becoming very self-aware, then he would commission them and send them into the world to practice compassion and kindness. Great idea. Goes back a long ways. Compassion. This is probably one of the bigger ideas in this particular chapter, and it's a big idea in the book, okay? Compassion is growth in self-awareness. If we don't grow or awaken, if we don't grow in self-awareness and become aware of our inner child, that primitive ego from childhood, which is becoming aware basically of the beam in our own eye, then we can't sustain kindness and compassion for other people, because that beam is going to keep getting in the way. And there'll be a lot of good examples as we get into future chapters, so that this will make total sense when we get there. But right now, the basic concept that I want to leave you with, the big idea, is that authentic spiritual growth has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with becoming self-aware. Self-awareness and authentic spiritual growth are one and the same subject. In other words, you can't have authentic spiritual growth unless you've become self-aware, and vice versa. Any growth in self-awareness is, by definition, an authentic spiritual growth. So to summarize, recognize that these two are one and the same subject. Confucius, practice self-awareness. It is the key to compassion and kindness in all of our relationships with ourselves and others. Graft on the new ideas and let them, if they make sense, let them adjust your maps of reality. Growth is not a force of will. It's just changing the old way of seeing when the old ways don't make sense anymore. And finally, primitive ego is not bad. And I can't emphasize that one enough. It's just immature. We don't want a seven-year-old running our life, because the 7-year-old just doesn't have the sophistication and life experience to do a good job in the adult world. Okay? So there it is. There's chapter 1. I go into a lot more detail, obviously, in the book, but these are the key points. Okay, we'll see you down the road at chapter 2.